Regret is like a psychological cancer that can get in you and spread, and not only fuel rumination, but make you prone, again, to this sense of victimhood and turn you into your own worst enemy. I'm going to take on an interesting question today, and before I start the video, I'd love to hear some of your thoughts on it. If you know anyone like this, do you know anyone out there who's actually immune to narcissists, meaning that they're just not bothered by them? Because that's what this video is going to take on, is this question: are there some people out there who are actually immune to narcissists? Before we get to that, and again, drop a comment there if you know anyone like that. Hit that like button, give us that thumbs up if you do like this video. Subscribe, you get the comments alone just to tune into those just about every day is worth it. And then also hit that bell if you want to get notifications. So let's answer this question though. Are there people out there who are actually immune to narcissists? If that was a medication I could sell, I'd be a very wealthy woman. It's an interesting question that clients have raised with me, have demonstrated to me, and lots of people have asked about. I've gotten more than a few emails about this question. I can all but bet if there was a magic pill or perhaps even an immunization that you could take that would make you immune to narcissists, that more than a few of you would be happy to sign up, especially those of you who have to still live your day-to-day lives with narcissists and they really, really take a toll on you. This idea of being immune to narcissists is a phenomenon I've seen a few times. There are people out there who themselves are actually not narcissistic or not fully, who literally don't let narcissists get under their skin. They will be working with one, they have a parent who is one, they have a partner who is one, and it really doesn't get to them. They'll tell the partner to step off, and if they don't, they'll leave. They shrug their shoulders at the difficult colleague and don't let it get in the way of them doing their work. They find a way to communicate with the difficult parent, and it doesn't get to them. It's really interesting to see. So what's going on? What do these people have going on that lets them kind of navigate these worlds without it really taking a toll on them? Now, let me please start with a disclaimer. Some of these so-called narcissist immune people, I guess, can sometimes be a little enably, a little gaslighty, and sort of benign narcissisty. They may minimize the struggles you are having with the narcissist, and they may also not call the narcissist out, so the narcissist will stay up to their usual tricks. It just doesn't bother the person who's immune to it. But this isn't always the case. The fact is, they're not always enably, they're not always a little narcissistic, they're just not bothered by the narcissist. So, what is their secret? Because once you know it, you're going to know it. So their secret is so simple that I know you're going to roll your eyes. I can see right through it. I can see you're rolling your eyes as you watch this video, but it's really this simple. They don't take the narcissist's BS personally. It's literally that simple. They don't make it personal. I have worked with clients who had very toxic parents and difficult histories. They've worked with toxic colleagues. They've had toxic partners, and they were fine. They were not confused. They were not full of self-doubt. They weren't ruminating. They just didn't take it personally. As I said, I've worked with more than a few clients like this. Now, they are rare. They're very rare, people like this. But they tend to have a few things, I don't know, for lack of a better way to put it, they have a few things going for them. First of all, people who are immune to narcissists tend to be confident and self-assured in their own abilities. They're clear on what they know, and they're clear on what they don't know. And in addition to that, they do tend to do things that they love, whether it's in their work or in their hobbies or both. There's a self-assuredness. Number two, that they don't take the narcissist's behavior personally, the point I was making originally. They're able to say, yeah, he's an absolute jerk, or she is a complete and utter pain in the neck. That's on them, though. It has nothing to do with me. So even when the narcissist is saying mean, gaslighty, invalidating, outlandish things, they just tend to shrug and they just don't make it their problem. The third thing we see in people who are immune to narcissists is that they're really able to hold on well to their reality. So even when they are gaslighted, again, they shrug and will say, all right, that's your version. I got a version. And I guess we're just going to have to agree to disagree. The fourth thing we see in people who are sort of immune to the narcissist is that they're able to set and maintain boundaries. Probably because they are relatively immune to the narcissist's bad behavior, they know when to quit. They are willing to leave dinner parties early, quit from jobs, stay in hotels instead of at the narcissist's house, and they have an uncanny ability to know when to say no and to stick by their boundary. Now, the fifth thing is, interestingly, they may not even know the narcissist is a narcissist. And that is a very important point for you to know. It's not as though that they all went out there and got educated on toxic personality styles, the kinds of things you're doing through this YouTube channel and the stuff you read. There's an equanimity to people who are immune to narcissists. And again, by equanimity, I mean they kind of just sort of are able to get along with everyone, and they just sort of shrug and say, I'm not going to let them get me down. Now, these sometimes lovely and relatively rare Zen scholars in our midst can often have tough backstories of their own. It's not as though these sort of narcissistic immune people necessarily come from cushy, loving, safe places. They often had very narcissistic families of origin and relatively tough life journeys. It's interesting because it's as though they were engaging in radical acceptance without knowing it was even a thing. They don't fight pointless battles. They don't personalize, and they don't let themselves be abused. They may actually make excuses for the narcissist, and that's interesting because what you might see is they'll literally say, ugh, that person, he doesn't know what he's saying, but then they may back that up with, but what they said was not okay. So they're just not fully enablers. Sometimes they're able to back it up with that statement saying that, yeah, that's not okay, even though they can't help themselves. These immune folks are able to skirt both sides. They know that the narcissist is totally not self-aware, and they're able to point the behavior out as problematic, especially to people who are being hurt by the narcissist. They're able to acknowledge, like, yeah, this isn't okay. People who are relatively immune to narcissists can be very easygoing in general. Things often just don't bother them. So in that way, like I said, it's not necessarily that they understand narcissism, it's that it just doesn't get to them. They don't tend to be people who always personalize everything. And what's even more interesting, and this is really important, they don't try to change the narcissist. They actually don't care that the narcissist won't change. And they don't always end the relationship. It's not like these folks are going no contact all the time. It's the fact that they understand that the narcissist won't change, and for whatever reason, to them, it doesn't bother them. Now, when their narcissistic relationship gets more abusive, and it may escalate into a violent realm, the fact is the odds are very high that the immune narcissistic people got out of those relationships long before it happened. But if it does, again, the immune person is likely to step away, clearly recognize violence as never acceptable, and write the narcissistic person off as having an issue that is not their own. So, what can we learn from these narcissistically immune unicorns who are in our midst? Number one, with the narcissist, don't take it personally. These immune folks have an incredible ability to shrug and say, this isn't about me. That's them, it's not me. Number two, they don't try to change the narcissist ever. They accept that this is how it is, and because they don't personalize it, it often doesn't get to them. It's not saying that they like it, but they're like, I'm not going to be the one to change this. Number three, they engage in self-preservation. Immune folks have solid enough psychological cores and egos to do the things that make them happy and to find the good stuff around them, even when the narcissist is making a mess out of everything. And if the relationship becomes too unhealthy, they set boundaries or they step away, but not from an anguish, grief-stricken position. They just step away saying, I can't do this. The fourth thing is that they're not afraid. Many, if not most people, are terrified of the narcissist's rage. And this does not apply in cases when a narcissist becomes violent. I'm talking about sort of that psychological loud rage. The immune folks are just not afraid of traditional rage. They'll take the stance of let this narcissist make a fuss. They look ridiculous, and if they start yelling, I'm out. I'm not going to listen to someone yelling at me. Fifth, they know when to cut their losses. Some narcissistic relationships are simply not sustainable. The people who are immune to narcissists, somehow they have a good sense of when that is, and they step away or do a sort of gray rock situation. Interestingly, immune folks often don't go full no contact unless the narcissist initiates it. Again, these immune folks are just able to shrug it off. Number 6, they don't derive any of their self-worth from the narcissist. One of the most toxic dynamics we observe in the narcissistic relationship is the trauma bonding and the codependency. The person in the relationship with the narcissist derives their self-esteem or their sort of sense of self from mastering or taming the narcissist. The narcissistically immune folks don't have that kind of bond. They don't feel the need to master the narcissist, and they're just sort of good with themselves. None of this is to say that the immune people don't get exhausted by the narcissist. They absolutely do. They can find it very depleting to be with a narcissist, but they are very good at engaging in the sort of decompressing and self-care that narcissistic relationships require. They may recognize that they won't, for example, join folks from work for happy hour because they're really genuinely tired from dealing with all the kinds of ups and downs of the narcissistic conversation all day, and they know they're not going to change. Or they may cut time on a family vacation or a family holiday shorter because they know their limits. Or they go to bed earlier than their narcissistic partner, so they just don't have to deal with arguments in the evening. They recognize the exhaustion and they don't personalize it, but they attend to it. Almost the way a new parent needs to attend to making sure they get rest because they've got a new crying baby at night. And the immune folks are human too, and will acknowledge that it's not healthy, that these narcissistic relationships are not healthy. But again, not from a place of being shredded and soul crushed by these relationships, but from a circumspect place. They accept, I just can't get through to them, and I am not going to waste my time and energy on them. So perhaps being immune to narcissists may really be about being kind to yourself, not taking another person's behavior personally, learning to shrug a lot, living a life you love, and doing things you enjoy, cultivating your sense of self, and in some ways giving up on the expectations that other people dictate to you about life. So many people in narcissistic relationships turn themselves into human sacrifices, trying to please an unpleasable human being. But if you think about it, the day you sort of stop caring about what they think and sort of, again, shrugging it off, that could be a really, really important step to your freedom. Because here's the thing. Narcissistic relationships are so triggering that most of us are probably never going to fully get to this place of immunity. But we can definitely take a page out of the immune person's playbook, or at least steal a few of their great psychological antibodies and learn from them. And a final point on something that the people who are immune to narcissists are able to do. They don't get overwhelmed or tricked by the enablers and the people who do the gaslighting by proxy. Once again, the narcissistically immune people, much as they, just like any human being, want to fit in. They know who they are enough, and they know that they can see that the narcissist behavior isn't necessarily good, that even when the enablers are saying, no, 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 what they're doing is fine, that the immune person's able to say, yeah, no, it's actually not fine and it's not good for me, so I'm not going to do it and I'm actually not going to hang out with them. There's a very matter-of-fact quality. If you've ever been in the presence, and again, I'd love to hear in the comments if any of you have ever been in the presence of someone who really is immune to this. They're very, very unique creatures. Like I said, they can feel very zen. And I'm going to be honest, some of them, again, can be a little mildly narcissistic. They're a little bit, there's a word out there, it's a good word for you to learn. They're a little supercilious. It's like, I can't be bothered. So they can feel a little snobby. So I'm not saying that these narcissistically immune people are saints or angels by any stretch. They can just sort of be a little above it all. But it is very interesting to me how they just don't get their noses bent out of shape. And again, I want to remind you, don't hold this up as a goal. A lot of us, just the way we're wired, present company included, we're not going to get to a place of full immunity. Narcissists still really get to me. I still go into the shower and scream and let forth some choice expletives, or come home and just yell at the cat and can't believe that this has happened. So they still get to me. So I'm telling you, knowing as much as I know, I'm not immune. I know that there's old ancient triggers for me that get set off. And I'm always fascinated by the people who are relatively immune. Like I said, over the years, I've been jotting down the things they do. It becomes an interesting playbook. So even if you're never going to be fully immune, just make it so that the next time you're in the presence of that virus called narcissism, you don't get the full-blown flu and can keep it a little milder. Let's talk about regret. Now, if there is a universal experience that people who are experiencing narcissistic abuse or who are survivors of narcissistic abuse all share, it is the experience of regret. What are the regrets that people talk about? They'll say that I regret that this relationship ever happened. I regret that I spent so much time in it. I regret that somehow this relationship wasn't different. I saw such potential. I regret at the opportunities I lost because of being in this relationship. I regret what being in this relationship did to my family. I regret not getting out of this relationship sooner. Believe it or not, there's people who regret that it ended. I'll talk more about that in a moment. And actually, I'd love for any of you to share some of the regrets you've had in your narcissistic relationship. Drop them in the comments. Would love to hear them. Now, regret is a sense of sadness or disappointment over something that has occurred, and particularly over any kind of a lost opportunity or just lost moment. You can easily see how regret and rumination are best friends. Regret gives rumination its material. A hefty chunk of what people ruminate about is, ding, regret. In an intimate or close relationship is where we see regret is often the most pronounced. It's most often because you are the person who chose this person. In many cases, people regret the day that they met this person. They regret not seeing the red flags earlier and listening to them. They may regret moving too fast, falling for the red flags early on, and falling for the hoovering down the pike. Then you may get caught in the regret abyss. You're not sure whether you're willing to leave because you have fear about regretting that you left. And then you're not sure whether you should stay. But then you have potential regret about the time you may waste if you stay. Can't win. Many people I have worked with over the years have indicated that they regret that they didn't honor the red flags that they saw in the first few months. And they kick themselves for years or even a lifetime about that. Now, interestingly, some people regret leaving and take the stance of perhaps the devil you know is better than the devil you know don't, and it's preferable. And they ruminate and wonder about whether the next person will get a better version of the narcissist. By the way, there is no better version of them. This is it. This is as good as it gets. Or they'll wonder if maybe the next person will be enough for the narcissist. And remember, nobody and nothing is ever enough for the narcissist. There may be regrets about time that you lost with children if you leave, family relationships that would be ruined if you leave the narcissistic relationship. And the regrets from leaving a narcissistic relationship can really be quite paralyzing for some people. So you can see here how regret is such a universal part of narcissistic abuse. Now, if you are from a narcissistic family, regret is a baseline that thrums throughout your life. When you come from a narcissistic family, let's face it, you missed out. You missed out on important social, emotional development that arises out of healthy mirroring, unconditional love, and validation. You missed out on those things. You missed out on stretching your wings because you felt safe enough to do so, and you felt as though you were enough, rather than feeling like not enough. You missed out on the nudge of encouragement you needed to pursue your dreams. You missed out on the support you needed just to figure stuff out. That's a lot of stuff to regret. And there's a risk for those from narcissistic families that they can live in this morass of regret for a very long time. And then there's a greater risk of falling into a pattern of victimhood, which can hold you back. But it's understandable when opportunities had to occur, that those opportunities, like mirroring, had to occur during a certain developmental window and they didn't happen. Regret is an almost sensible reaction to that. There's no going back. And in the workplace, a narcissistic boss or a narcissistic mentor can easily derail your career. Your ideas might get stolen or ignored. You may not fluff the boss enough and then get replaced by the narcissist's sycophants and minions. Anyone who thinks they can survive and or thrive under a narcissistic boss is woefully wrong. And many, many years can be wasted in a job waiting for the narcissistic boss to either advance you, or perhaps you're waiting for the narcissistic boss to be replaced. The fact is, a narcissist is far more likely to outlast you in a workplace. And the regret over years wasted in a job where you have no chance of being noticed, working under conditions of chaos and undermining, can fill you with bottomless regret. So what do you do? Well, how do you deal with this part of narcissistic abuse, of regret? Regret is like a psychological cancer that can get in you and spread, and not only fuel rumination, but make you prone, again, to the sense of victimhood and turn you into your own worst enemy. It is such a classical part of narcissistic abuse, and it needs to be addressed systematically. So what are some things you can do? First, remember, above all else, acceptance really matters. This narcissistic abuse is a hand that was dealt to you, especially in an involuntary relationship like family. You didn't choose them. But here's the deal. And as abusive and invalidating and painful as this narcissistic relationship was, and wishing it was different or regretting it happened, those patterns burn important emotional resources you need to be able to make a better fight for yourself. Secondly, after you get through acceptance, you need to focus on meaning and purpose. You need to find a way to integrate this difficult story and find the meaning and purpose. It can be profoundly powerful. And instead of regret, you may then find a strength in pushing back on narcissistic abuse. That goes back to the idea I keep saying over and over on these videos, that surviving narcissistic abuse is a superpower. That's because it is. Regret can be spun into something bigger and better once you can extract some kind of meaning from this experience. Third, you got to recognize that some days are going to be much harder than others. Even if after you've healed from narcissistic abuse, ongoing experiences in your life can be quite activating and triggering, and they can once again flood you with that sense of regret. You can't control those experiences. It's okay. It will pass. Sometimes people feel that if they are hearing about people who had healthy family systems, or whose marriages are working, or careers are succeeding, while theirs have been harmed by narcissistic abuse, you can feel that regret come up again. Please be gentle with yourself. It's okay to be with the negative feeling. It'll pass. Fourth, please be careful that you don't fall into a vortex of victimhood. It's so easy to do. You've been through a lot if you've endured narcissistic abuse, and it's very easy to go from regret to why did this happen to me? Then you start going to why does everything bad happen to me? Catch yourself before that happens. A victimized identity can hold you back, and you need to be your best advocate. Yeah, something bad did happen to you, and now is the time to learn from it and pay attention to red flags and not enable the narcissist and all of that stuff. But you also need to take a minute to pay attention to any of the good stuff that's happening in your life. That stuff can be an antidote to regret. Fifth, therapy. And I'm going to be saying this throughout this series, but yeah, you need a place to lay out all the regret and purge it, and then slowly release it. Therapy is that place for many people. And other people may find spiritual outlets as well as daily practices such as meditation. Others of you may find that therapy is not accessible for you. You might find, for example, online support spaces, Facebook groups for survivors of narcissistic abuse. Those may also give you communities where you can see people do share their regret. Narcissistic relationships waste time. They waste a lot of time. Years, decades, and sadly in some cases, lifetimes. Some people may lift their head and say, you know what, I'm 70 years old. I gave up my life to this. What am I supposed to do now? And get very angry. You know what? 70 is late in the game. I'll give you that. However, that narcissistic abuse has already done so much harm. Please don't give the rest of your time to that. It is such a common pattern in narcissistic abuse, and of all the patterns, it's one that really makes sense. Pushing back on the regret in terms of survival from narcissistic abuse is a gift you can give yourself. Please find a way to get there. And again, I would love to hear from any of you some of your regrets from being in a narcissistic relationship. These comments then become another tool for all of us to get support and share your experiences so all of you can see that you're not alone. Just drop that in the comments, do it anonymously, change your name on YouTube if you need to so you can share some of this. But hearing some of these things really fortify my ability even to talk about these issues, and certainly everyone else is going to grow from it too. Let's talk about this proverb. Recently, and in the last few weeks, for a variety of reasons, I've been spending more of my time thinking and writing and reflecting on healing and recovering from narcissistic abuse. I think part of it is an antidote. It really does get to be a bit much to spend so much time thinking about what narcissism is and what makes narcissistic folks tick and blah, blah, blah. Like every so often you need a break. So let's talk a little bit about healing. But this healing space, it's so complicated. I am a firm believer that people can actually come back better than ever, better than even before from narcissistic abuse. And that's where this proverb really hit me, this idea that is to get lost is to learn the way. Now, one of the issues that really complicates healing from narcissistic abuse is regret. There is so much regret, rumination, and grief. Regret about time wasted, about having had a difficult childhood, about being invalidated and feeling not enough from childhood, about years spent in the wrong marriage or in the wrong relationship, about the harm that may have come to others because of these relationships, or the harm that came to careers or to educations that got stalled or thwarted. The issue I see most pointedly when I am working with survivors of narcissistic abuse is anger and regret. Regret, again, about time and opportunities lost. That then marches alongside damaging self-talk as well as self-blame. People saying things to themselves like, how could I have not seen this? How could I have been so foolish? Why did I stay for so long? But that kind of stuff misses the point about what gets learned. I don't want you staying in these relationships 1 second longer than you need to. But a lot does get learned, whether you leave after a week or after 50 years. I actually am more and more astonished in my life every time I meet someone who doesn't understand narcissism. And you know who I mean, the folks out there who are the enablers, the folks out there who are naive, even the folks who are lucky. But the people who are like, narcissism, huh? What's so bad about, I don't get it. Like, I don't get narcissism. What's so bad about people who are superficial or stupid stuff like, oh, all marriages are hard, or don't take their criticism so seriously, blah, blah, blah. You know, the usual enabling nonsense. I guess for me, what's interesting is I spend my days and nights thinking about narcissism, reading about it, talking about it, speaking to people going through it, teaching about it. So when I meet people who don't get it, it does remind me that I live and work in a bit of a silo. Because none of you live in a silo either, right? You're getting this. Because once you get lost in it, once you get hurt by it, you really do learn something profound. You learn about human nature and the dark side of human nature. You learn about the importance of empathy. You learn about compassion. You learn about how much validation of our feelings and experiences really matters. You learn about the importance of depth in a relationship. We think we know these things, but we really don't really get them until we get lost in one of these relationships. The proverb, to get lost, is to learn the way. After a person gets through the initial grief, this proverb reminds people that this confusing journey of narcissistic abuse actually can be harnessed for self-knowledge. Sometimes it's only by going through these relationships that we do start to learn about core wounds and core values and the distorted beliefs that we hold about ourselves that hold us back. There are definitely less painful ways to learn these things, though, so please don't go out there seeking a narcissistic relationship to learn stuff. But once it happens, and these days it seems inevitable that everyone's going to have at least one narcissistically abusive relationship. Once it happens, one of the most important steps towards growth is find a way to extract some meaning from it. Now, please, I would love to hear from you. Drop me a comment. Let me know what's the most important thing you learned from having been in a narcissistic relationship. And it doesn't need to be positive. You can write, you could be angry in your comments. Now, from these relationships, we also learn how to throw a Hail Mary pass in the service of our own lives. Life within a narcissistic relationship is so bleak that when we get out and we really understand it, once we can sort of push back and push away from the euphoric recall and the vulnerability of the trauma bonds, then we can really cherish the freedom that comes from being out of one of these relationships. Lots of people love talking about mindfulness and being present. Let's face it, things like mindfulness, these are wellness buzzwords. But after you get out of a narcissistic relationship, you have the chance to really learn what they mean. When we are in narcissistic relationships, we are under siege. We are trying to survive, walking on eggshells, ducking away from rage, being betrayed, being gaslighted, being invalidated. It makes everything from going out to dinner to taking a trip to emptying the dishwasher a very complicated space. This is where coming out of a narcissistically abusive relationship can be a superpower, something I've said to you over and over again. You don't need a mindfulness coach. If you take a minute and recognize, all you need to do once you get away from one of these relationships, take a minute and recognize that going to the grocery store without fear of getting the wrong thing or spending too much, pay attention to how that feels. Or just being present with going to the airport without someone raging at you. Be present with that. Or having a dinner out without being accused of flirting with the server or being with somebody who is flirting with the server. The mindfulness as part of the healing, it really involves an appreciation of the most ordinary moments. To just be able to put up your feet and watch a movie without having to endure a snarky comment. Or taking a vacation without someone complaining the entire time. that can feel like a revelation. You can learn to be present with these moments and how beautiful these simple things are. You might even do things like empty the top rack of the dishwasher first just because you can. Or you can watch all the seasons of Schitt's Creek or some other fun, silly show from the beginning again just because you can. Or you can eat good and plenty candies in bed just because you can. And there's no need to hide them or fear of being criticized. And you can embrace simple and regular moments. And I think I just gave you a peek into a few of my guilty pleasures, which to this day I relish when I can do them. So please leave a comment below. I love hearing about other people's guilty pleasures. What is one thing that you were not able to do or you couldn't do during your narcissistic relationship that you do now or you're able to do now that you're out of the narcissistic relationship? Kind of fun. A collective bucket list or daily fun list for all of us. Now, the same thing, though, happens with yourself, right? In terms of giving yourself permission. You give yourself permission to think good things like, oh, this cake I baked turned out well. Or I did a good job on this report. Or I did a good job with the garden. This happens because you aren't hearing the invalidating voices as much. And you can slowly replace them with, hey, self, not bad, you did a good job. Because someone's not always telling you you're doing a bad job. People who heal from narcissistic abuse have to learn to start loving their solitude. Lots of people make the mistake of confusing solitude and loneliness, and there is a difference. Solitude represents a peace and a comfort with the self, with yourself, alone. Loneliness is a more negative and despairing state. It's a longing. Once you really figure out how to relish your solitude, you become more discerning. And it is fear of solitude that has sunk many people into narcissistic relationships. After spending years being invalidated and gaslighted, solitude actually starts sounding like a good thing. Don't let yourself get slid into that trauma-bonded, I can't be alone. You can be alone, and it's a lot more peaceful. I'm owning my own personal experience. I had to get really, really lost before it all became clear. These days, my gratitude for a day of non-toxic peace, without toxic nonsense, without invalidation, without gaslighting. There is no beach on the planet, no special fancy restaurant, no experience in the world that feels better. I had to get lost to find that the way for me was simplicity, quiet, solitude, and ultimately staying away from toxic people. Healing and recovering from narcissistic abuse is not a linear path. Some folks get through to the other side quickly, others take years. And there is no clock on this. Again, both are fine. Some people really struggle with the solitude part. Others are like, wow, this feels really good. Some people find that the regret haunts them for years. Others are just relieved it's over. Do not put a clock on your healing. Everyone's healing process looks different. Adult narcissistic relationships are brutal. It was bad enough in childhood when you didn't know what was going on. In adulthood, there can often be even more self-blame because you felt like, maybe I chose this. But sometimes the working through entails getting a little lost in one of these relationships and then finding the other side. Remember, this doesn't always mean leaving the relationship. I know for some of you, leaving or going no contact is just not an option. It can mean being in it, seeing the relationship clearly for what it is, and setting the boundaries and expectations accordingly. Obviously, being in it is always going to take more of a toll on you, but you can do your best with it. Getting lost can be painful, scary, and feel really time-consuming, but it may be an essential path to finding the way, and hopefully, along the way, finding yourself. Narcissistic abuse is a teacher that nobody wanted. But ultimately, if it happened to you, at least try to find the teacher in it. Some, if not most of the lessons are harsh and cynical, while others are exactly what we needed to learn about the world and our place in it. But again, I can't stress this enough. Never ever say, well, I want a teacher. I want to get lost. I'm going to go into one of these relationships. Oh, the hell you're not. If for some reason you've managed to dodge the bullet of a narcissistic relationship, please keep dodging. And for those of you who've gotten caught in one of these relationships, at least turn it into a teacher. But again, as always, thanks so much for tuning in. Please subscribe. Let me know if you like this video by giving me that thumbs up. And I really welcome hearing all the ideas for Proverbs people are sending in. Increasingly, the Proverbs series is about Proverbs that are being suggested from all over the world. So please send them in, because if I can research it and make it work out, we'll definitely turn it into a video. Thanks again.